Hi, welcome back to Zangobolt's IT Academy. This will be the first of a series of videos centered around Microsoft Sentinel. And today we're going to try to understand what Microsoft Sentinel is. We're also going to get hands-on and create a Microsoft Sentinel instance in the Azure portal, as well as configure some of the components such as having a data connector that allows you to collect and ingest logs. We're going to look at some of the incidents that can be generated from Azure Microsoft Sentinel. We're going to look at creating some analytic rules, looking at dashboards, and a few other things from a basic level. So, what is Microsoft Sentinel? Microsoft Sentinel is a scalable cloud native security solution that provides two primary security functionalities, being a security information and event management, as well as a security orchestration, automation, and response. So that's a handful, and I'm going to try to break that down here. So a SIM essentially you can think of as a centralized tool that allows you to aggregate all of the logs, all of the security events that is happening in your environment. So you can think of a major organization that conducts different businesses and has different areas of businesses. They have a lot of servers, a lot of virtual machines, a lot of logs, quite frankly, that they want to be able to have actionable security events from to be able to better monitor their environment. So the best way to do this is to send it to a central place where from that place you can run rules, look for detection, and generate alerts that your security operation team can leverage to detect and respond to the bad things that are going on in your network. So that's what a SIM tool is. It's just a tool that helps you to kind of manage all of the events and the information that is in your environment. A SOAR, on the other hand, is kind of the phase two of okay, once I get an alert from my SIM tool, what do I do with it? Right. So a SOAR tool allows you to better automate your response to the incidents and the events that are coming out of your SIM tool. So in this case, we can think about a team that is kind of lean. They have a few SOC analysts that is looking into the SIM and responding to incident. So a SOAR tool allows you to automate some repetitive tasks that you need to do for you to investigate an alert that comes out of your system. Right. So Microsoft Sentinel provides these two capabilities within one platform so you can better respond and detect your incident. So let's dive into the portal and look at Microsoft Sentinel. So this is my Azure portal. So part of the prerequisites to following along with this training video is you would need to have a an Azure portal as well as a subscription. So if you're not familiar with either of those two terms, I will link a couple of documentation in the description where you can follow along to get a free Azure tenant as well as a subscription. So for the subscription, you would need to put a credit card on file, but you can stay within the free tier depending on the resources that you build. In this case, we're building a Microsoft Sentinel instance, and there is a 14-day free trial. So you should be able to follow along with those documentation and be able to get you a Azure tenant as well as a subscription where we will be deploying some of these resources. So now that we're in the Azure portal, you want to locate the Microsoft Sentinel resources. You can either search for it or click on it like I have in my view here. All right. So I already have a Sentinel workspace that is already set up and used to monitor my environment and my lab environment. So as you can see, I have a couple. I have some logs coming in, some logs flowing in, and I have some rules set up that is monitoring this environment. But because the scope of this call is for us to kind of walk through creating a Sentinel instance, I'm going to do that here. But in terms of actually demoing the logs and the data connectors that I have, I will come back into this instance and show what I have, and you can kind of follow along to set it up similarly to get to this point. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to create a or add a Microsoft Sentinel to a workspace. So Microsoft Sentinel essentially works on something called a log analytics workspace within Azure. So what we need to do is we need to first create that log analytic workspace before we can apply Sentinel to run on top of that workspace. So in this case, I'm going to select my subscription that I want this to be created in. I'm going to also select the resource group. If you don't already have a resource group, you can create a new one. I already have a resource group here, so I'm going to use that one. And we're going to call this something. In this case, I'll call it Sentinel resource group. I always like to prefix all of my resources. And I'll call this Corp Security O2. You can name it whatever you want, something that makes sense to you. And then for my region, you want to select whatever region where you plan on working out of, or whatever region is closest to you. In this case, I'm in US East, so I'm going to select that region. For tags, you can apply whatever tags that you want. In this case, I'll just put purpose and then training, if I can spell, and then I'm gonna click next, and then I'm going to create this log analytic workspace. So as you can see, Microsoft offers actually is a 31-day free trial. So as long as you stay within that 31 days, you're free to kind of play along. Moving forward, if you want to move this past the 31 days, you're free to. It's not an expensive resource, so long as the amount of logs that you're sending in isn't, like a crazy amount, right? Like an enterprise type environment where you're sending in thousands and millions of events. That's where you get charged a lot. But in terms of for us, we're just kind of worried about a little bit amount of logs, so we shouldn't cost much to get this working. So now that we have our deployment, we're gonna go to the resource. Right, so now we can go back to, so that what that did was just to create the log analytic workspace, right? So we need to go back to Microsoft Sentinel, and then we want to create Sentinel, and then this is the log analytic workspace that we created earlier. So it's going to ask us to use this workspace. So we're going to select add, and then this should go ahead and install Sentinel on top of this log analytic workspace that we just created. All right, so we get a notification that the free trial is active on this workspace from this date to that date. So we get about 31 days. During the trial, we have up to 10 gigabytes per day as free for both the Microsoft Sentinel and Log Analytics. So that all of that is good information. So we know we're not going to be charged for the 31 days while we're kind of messing around with this tool. All right, so perfect. So we have Sentinel. Everything is blank. We don't have, this is all greenfield. There's no data flowing into this Sentinel instance today. So what we're gonna do today is to touch on some of the important things to get us up and running and get some data flowing into the Sentinel instance. Okay, so I'm going to go back to let's just refresh this. I'm going to go back to the one that I originally had, and here we can kind of see so the first thing that we're going to talk about is data connectors, right? So data connectors, I think of as the first thing that you really want to do once you set up a Sentinel instance, and that is you want to identify the logs that you have in your environment that you want to feed into Sentinel, because this will be the basis of what this is how Microsoft Sentinel runs. Is you need to feed it alerts that you can use to investigate, right? So now you have to think about, okay, what all tools do I have throughout my environment? And then I know from a Microsoft standpoint, right, there are a few tools. Just by owning a Microsoft Azure tenant, you have an Azure Active Directories, right? So this is like the IAM tool, the Identity and Access Management tool for all of Azure, and for the most part, all of Microsoft as well, right? So this is where you create your users, assign permissions. Users, whenever they log in with Azure Active Directory, right? So for something like this would be a good log source or a log type that you want to feed into Sentinel, just so, because it will give you all of the events of everyone logging in, all of the service principal that are being used, all of the signings, where are they signing from. So these are all very rich security type information. So that's the approach that you want to kind of think about while when you want to send your logs in here. It needs to be kind of security focused. It needs to have a security context as well. And then also it needs to be helpful for you to better monitor your environment. So for this scope, right, and you can filter by the different provider. You can filter by the different data types. You can filter by status. So in this case, I chose to, because this is the easiest type of logs that you can set up. So I chose to set up some of the Microsoft's tools and Microsoft resources that we need that we can easily configure. Right. So in this case, Azure Active Directory has some events flowing in, right? And Azure Activity has some events flowing in, Key Vault. So these are all important low hanging fruit of uh, data connectors that you want to set up, right? So I'm gonna go back to the one that we just created, and then we're going to configure a data connector. So as you can see, there is 0 data connectors inside of this workspace. So I'm going to look for Azure, and then I'm going to connect Azure Active Directory. So the way to do that is you just click on the Open Connector page, right? And there are a couple of prerequisites that you have to enable this, right? So you need to uh, have the workspace read and write permissions. You also need to have diagnostic setting read and write permissions, as well as a couple of tenant permissions, either global admin or security admin inside of this tenant. So if you follow the instructions and you created a new Azure tenant, you should be a global admin because you recently created it, and you should be able to do these changes. So what we want to do is we want to select the types of logs that we want to collect. So in this case, for example, sign-in logs, audit logs, I would just go ahead and do all of these different log types, right? And then we want to hit apply. Now, what that would do is that would start feeding all of the Azure Active Directory alerts or events and logs into Sentinel. So pretty soon, if we give it a while, we would see that this changes from 0 connected, and then becomes connected, right? So that's kind of what we've done here. So that's one data connector, right? We can go down the list of setting up identity privilege protection if we have the license for that. Azure Active Directory, that's more related to the subscription and the activity that happens within your subscription and the resources that are running for your applications or whatever you create. So there are a ton of built-in connectors that we can select. Like there are third-party ones as well. If you have a Cisco firewall, you can set that up as a connector. And I'm just going down the list. Like if you have a Google Workspace, you can integrate some of those logs in here. There are a ton of Microsoft tools, Microsoft Power BI, Defender. So Office 365, this is another pretty popular one. So if you have an Office 365 environment where you have a SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, things like that, you can forward all of those logs in here and be able to see, and later on in this video, I'll kind of demo the dashboards that will talk a little bit more about Office 365 and what you can see with those dashboards as well. All right, so there are a ton of different uh, data connectors that you can set up here, both built-in, Microsoft related, as well as third party. All right, so that's the first step. The next thing that we're also going to kind of look into, right, is once we have the data connectors flowing in, right, uh, what like how do we kind of generate alerts, right? How do we monitor for all of these logs that we have in Microsoft Sentinel? So that's where analytics come into play, analytic rules, right? So analytic rules allows you to then write clever detection rules that looks for patterns that match a potential security event or security compromise or security data breach, whatever it is that you want to find, and that pattern. Analytic rules allows you to write a custom matching rule that would detect that. If it sees that anywhere in the logs, it would generate something called an incident, and that's what we investigate as part of this. All right, so in this case, I went ahead. So there is always an advanced multi-stage attack detection built rule that is created. I think this is one of the Microsoft clever rules that looks for everything and kind of generates a high fidelity alert for you. All right, so if I go back to the workspace that I already had previously created and I have some data flowing in, I'll go into analytic rules. So as an example, I created a rule, right? So and I'll show that. So if you create a rule, these are the kind of the setups that you have to configure, right? So under the general tab, you can set up the name for your rule, the ID and description and whatnot, and then the severity of what you want this rule to generate as. Um, and then on this next tab, this is where you configure what you want your logic to be. Right. So in this case, I'm just looking for a role change, right? So somebody goes into an Azure privilege management and changes the role setting. So this alert will look for that and then trigger an alert based on that. Right. So the rest of the things in here we can just kind of review them, but they're not necessarily important right now. But once we kind of have that set up, we can hit save, and this will save that rule. Right, so that's it for analytic rule. Right? So you have data connectors, you have analytic rule, and there are a bunch of rule templates that Microsoft creates automatically where we don't have to write all the rules custom. We can leverage some of the ones that are already here, and it's really as easy as clicking on the template, create role, leave all the settings default, and just kind of setting it up, and then you have some built-in detection right out the box with Microsoft Sentinel, and that's kind of why it's so powerful because it has some of these kind of built-in plug and play type of rule detections and data connectors that we can use and leverage easily. All right, so besides the data connectors, besides the analytic rules, the third thing that I would like to kind of call out would be the incident, right? So once we set up an analytic rule, if there is a match on something that we set up in the rule, right, it would generate an incident. As you can see, this rule that I have is for uh, active rules is to for changes to pin settings, right? So prior to recording the video, I actually went ahead and uh, you know initiated a PIM change that resulted in this alert being generated. So in this case, we can kind of get a side view of what this alert is. Right, so it just gives us high level description of the alert, as well as some of the evidence, and we can click on this and dive deeper to see exactly what I did to cause this alert. In this case, I'm going to click on view full details. All right, so this just kind of breaks it down, gives us a timeline. There's changes to PIM settings. These are all the stuff that I did earlier today to kind of generate some of these alerts. And if we want to dive even deeper, we can click on this evidence events tab. Let's see. Yep, that should run the query and give us. So this is actually KQL language that this is how you query for things within Microsoft Sentinel. It uses KQL. So in this case, we were able to kind of see all the alerts that was generated for this, and we can get more information and drill down to see the description of it, the time that it started, all of the information that we need to make an actionable decision. Is this a true positive? Is it a false positive? In this case, since I was the one that triggered this alert, this would be a false positive alert because it's not an indication of a security compromise. This is just something that I did right out of testing. Okay, so that's basically it for the incident, right? So in this case, this gives us a SOC capability to where we can add comments, we can assign this incident to an individual. So in this case, I'll assign it to myself as the person that's working on it. You can change the status from this is currently being investigated, so it's actually active, and this is how a typical SOC works, right? So you get an alert, you have to investigate it, see if it's true positive and if it's false positive. If it's true positive, then goes down the path of doing an incident response, and then making sure that this bad person or this bad actor is no longer in your environment. If it's a false positive, you would mark it as such and then tune it, right? So that's just typical day-to-day SOC operation. So this shows the power of Sentinel, where it gives us all of that capability within Microsoft, and it kind of integrates with all of Microsoft's ecosystem. And then I guess finally for this video, I just want to showcase the workbooks. Right. So in this workbooks, right, we can visualize things that are happening in our environment. So we got the data connectors to send the logs. We have the analytic rules to detect or alert when something bad happens. We have this workbook to give us a high level view or high level graph of things, right? So if you, for example, have a question is how many user has logged into our Azure AD tenant within the last 48 hours, right? So this kind of workbook or graph kind of gives us that information at a high level, right? So in this case, we have a bunch of templates. I don't have any workbooks set up, so we're just gonna activate the Azure AD signing logs because I have those logs available today. So I'm going to click on uh, view saved workbooks. So now this workbook is active, and then over the last 48 hours, right? I'm going to look at for the application. Well, that's fine. I'm going to leave it for all the applications. I'm going to leave all these other parameters default. If I want to specify by a username, I can do that as well. Or the category of events, right? But in this case, I'll leave it default. And as you can see, this is a pretty powerful graph of all the signing that has occurred over the last 48 hours by all the users. The 549 were successful, 9 pending user actions. We have the user agent and devices that are authenticated. So in this case, a Mac, iOS, Android, and things like that. And for the most part, they were all by me. So these are just pretty powerful information that as a SOC analyst is pretty invaluable to be able to see what's going on in your environment from this view, and it's also you can kind of use it to as a SOC manager. This kind of comes in pretty helpful to be able to run metrics and see how you as a security operation is responding to incidents and how you're kind of detecting and mean time to detection, mean time to response, some of these important metrics as you manage and operate your SOC environment. All right, so that's essentially it for the workbooks. And I'm going to try to keep this video pretty brief. Again, this is a high level introduction to Microsoft Sentinel. In this case, what we've done is we understand what Sentinel is, right? So Sentinel is just it's a SOC tool that we want to aggregate all of our alerts. We know why we're using it, so we can give us the full visibility of what is going on in our environment. We have also looked at like how to set up a data connector, right? We looked at how to set up some rules. We've looked at the workbooks and the incidents, right? So these are high level topics, and there are a lot more that Sentinel can do. And in future videos, we're going to dive into some of these features, right? We're going to look at automation, right? So this is the SOAR aspect of it. How when we get an alert, what happens? Well, we can create an automation rule that does something, integrates with Slack, for instance, or Microsoft Teams, where it will send a notification automatically, so we don't have to actually be eyes on keyboard all day. We can just wait for an alert to come into our Slack channel, and then come in and review that. There are other things like we can automate some of the content that we add, such as the analytic rules, using the repositories connected to like a GitHub. There's also threat intelligence, UBA. So these are some security topics that we can get right out the box with Microsoft Sentinel. There's also like an AI machine learning capability. This is a little bit more on the complex side and an advanced level. But hopefully at some point we're going to touch on how to create notebooks and how to use some machine learning from a security and monitoring standpoint. Okay, so that's all there is for today's video. Hopefully this has been helpful. So this, again, I mentioned this would be the first of a series of other videos that we're going to dive into some of the Microsoft Sentinel functionalities, and the goal of this is so we can get hands-on experience, something that will be valuable for any job that we go to or any company that is looking for implementing a cost-effective security monitoring solution that is already integrated with some of their ecosystem tools and whatnot. So this will kind of give us that foot in the door of the tool that we need to learn. So yeah, that essentially wraps it up for this video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave a comment below. Also, don't forget to subscribe, and we'll be sure to post more content in the future. All right. Thanks a lot, and have a good one.